The cause for the canonization is beginning for Mother Marie-Adele Garnier. She is the foundress of the Tyburn convent of the Benedictine nuns in London, and we'll talk to two of the sisters from that convent and learn more about Mother Garnier and the history behind Tyburn Tree as well. So please stay with us. Thank you. Thank you very much and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa and welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all over the world. Before we get to our guests, I want to mention that today is the feast of Saint Anthony Zacharia. He was born in 1502 and didn't live a particularly great Catholic life at the outset. He was a soldier, and soldiers were not always known as the most upright people when it came to personal morals. He got a lot of gambling debts and such, but eventually experienced a conversion and left the military, became a priest, and started a community known as the Barnabites. He was influenced by St. Paul quite a bit, and he saw himself as being like St. Barnabas, who had accompanied St. Paul. And his community did wonderful work and continues to do wonderful work in going around and helping those in need. He died in 1539, a pretty young man at 37, but he did a tremendous amount, having exhausted himself in his service of the poor and also in his concern for reform of the church. He reformed his own life by the grace of God, and he became an important force for the ongoing reformation of the church at a time when there was a lot of turmoil inside. All right, now as I always say, we have guests from all over the world, and tonight we do very much. They are two Benedictine nuns from a convent in London, England, just yards away from where more than 100,000 Catholics and other Christians lost their lives during the centuries of brutal religious persecution. The foundress of their order is now being considered for possible sainthood after her death 93 years ago. Here to tell us more about the order, its foundress, and its place in history, please welcome Mother Mary Xavier Mcmonagle and Mother Marilla. Mother,
thank you.
Good to have you. Welcome. Good to have you all here.
Right.
Welcome to Alabama. This is a different Birmingham than the one you're used to.
That's right. My word, it is indeed. Yes.
And a little bit warmer.
Yes.
It's great to have you here. This is a topic that's of great interest to me because quite a number of my Jesuit brothers were martyred near Tyburn.
At Tyburn.
And right at Tyburn. First of all, what was Tyburn? Tell us about that before we go into your order.
Yes, I can tell you of something about Tyburn, but in the life of our mother foundress, that is what comes at the end of the story, not the beginning of the story.
Well, we'll just give a setting for where you are, and then we'll get into her story.
Right. Well, Tyburn in London was the place of the King's Gallows, and people died there. They were hanged, cut down alive, disemboweled and burnt, and their body parts were stuck on London Bridge for people to taunt them even in their death for over more than 6-7 centuries, from 1190 something until 1700 and 83, I think it was. That was
Yes.
the last execution at Tyburn.
Which year?
1783.
83.
Yes.
So this is something, and we have a little clip I want to show people because
Yes.
this will help to give some of the
Background.
importance
Yes.
of where your
You are.
convent is. So let's take a look at that clip on the background of the persecutions at Tyburn Tree.
This story begins at Marble Arch, Oxford Street and Hyde Park in central London. Walking west along Oxford Street to Marble Arch, who recalls that he is treading the route of the black map of London's landscape of pain and shame?
The Black Map was created by the frenzy of religious persecution in Tudor times, when Christian martyrs were killed as heretics at Smithfield and for treason at Tyburn.
The Black Map comprises the areas of Smithfield, the Tower of London, Newgate Prison, the Old Bailey, to the one-way destination at the dread Tyburn Tree, now named Marble Arch. Beneath the surface of this busy modern intersection, the Black Map still records the atrocities inflicted on those executed here. Their fate? To be hanged, drawn and quartered amid cruelest barbarities and grossest indecencies.
By 1903, the signs of the Black Map had almost disappeared.
In God's providence, it was about to be transformed into a place of religious pilgrimage to honour the 105 Catholic martyrs who had traversed this route and died condemned here between 1535 and 1681. The dark history of the Tyburn Tree gained its religious transformation with the beginning of Tyburn Convent.
All right, well, this is a very, very sacred and holy place with many, many martyrs having been executed there. And your convent is the closest Catholic institution to it, correct?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Now, what are you doing there? How did your community
we get
get
there?
there? Yeah, now we'll get to the story of Mother Adele.
It's a long, long story because she was 60 years old when she came to Tyburn first. And if I can go right to the beginning of her life as a French woman, to how and why she came to London and how and why she ended up at Tyburn.
That's why we have you here. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, she was born in a place called Grancy-le-Château in the Champagne area of France, Côte d'Or, and near Dijon. Her family originally came apparently from Italy. Garnier was their name. And they came to France at the time of the Reformation, just before the Reformation disturbances, because they could see it happening and going to happen worse. But once they were in France, it was very short time before they were also then dispersed again, and quite a number of them came to England. So they were not Catholics, they were some other kind of religion that belonged to the offshoots from the church at that time.
Yeah, were they Waldensians?
No.
Some other group.
Huguenots was what some of them called them, but I'm not sure they were totally that, though some today say they are. But in England, they mostly became eventually Anglican, and there are several Anglican bishops over the centuries and several artists, but altogether they were always a very religious family. Some of them in France went further south down towards the Dijon area, and that's where you find the Garnier name today. And there's one Garnier priest in the Dijon diocese that's still operating there. Now, Mother was born in this place, Grancy-le-Château, on the Feast of the Assumption, 1838. She was baptized in the as a Catholic at the Chateau of Grancy on the 13th of September. Then shortly after that, her mother was very frail and gradually declined, and when she was 6 years old, the mother died. But she had left a message for her father to educate the girls, and the 4 girls and the one boy in the faith, and to send them to a convent school to have their sacraments properly administrated. She went then to Exile, and in 1851 she received her first Holy Communion the day after her first confession. The first confession was the 18th of May, the first communion was the 19th of May, and her confirmation was the 20th of May.
It was very common that people would have their first communion when they're a little bit older than we are today.
That's right.
It wasn't until Pius X that communion at the age of reason, around age 7, began, and first confession at the same time. Lord knows I had enough to confess at age 7. Waiting until age 12 would have been too long.
Yes, but this was that practice was largely due to what we call today the Jansenist heresy that was rife in France a few centuries before. And the basic residue of it was, we're so unworthy, we can't receive the sacraments, we can't receive Holy Communion only perhaps once a year or something. And she grew up in that milieu. But at the same time, at her first communion, she had learnt enough and knew enough that God would always hear your prayers on your first communion day. So she prayed that Jesus would take her life and allow her father to be brought back to the practice of the Catholic faith. Because like a lot of men in the Jansenistic atmosphere of France at that time, he didn't practice his faith. He was a Catholic, but he never practiced it. But she had to wait not just one day for him to die, for her to die and him to come into the faith. She had to wait another 38 years before he did it. And he did it on his deathbed, and she was present. You know,
I find that amazing, because I had made the same prayer for my dad.
Did you really?
At my first communion.
Oh, look at that.
And he also came back to the faith on his deathbed.
I think that was a little practice that some Frenchmen had anyway.
Well, my dad got sick as a surprise, so he responded to the surprise with a good confession.
Good on him. God bless him and God reward him. Yes, so that's basically that. But she went on, and I think I'd like to tell you a little bit about her normal life before I go into what I call her religious and spiritual life. First of all, at the age of 15 or 16, according to the custom of that area, her family arranged a marriage for her. And she, accepted it, but because she hadn't finished her education and she was receiving it by tutorship at home at the time, they put the marriage off for another few years. But the boy used to come and visit them and bring his friends along sometimes. And one day she was at the top of the stairs, and she was quite a pious girl, really, in the opinion of other people. Not in her own opinion. She thought she was very worldly and dissipated, but others thought she was pious. So she was at the top of the stairway to come down. She heard them speaking downstairs, this lad, her fiancé, and saying this sort of thing to his friends. "Oh, well, we know she's such a pious girl, but don't you worry about that. When we're married, I'll put a finish to all of that nonsense."
Oh, see, no, that's...
That galvanized her into action, and she swooped down the stairs and she stood in front of him and said, "Sir, you will never have me as your wife. Goodbye," and went back up.
Yeah.
And then that caused another scene, and he saw some open scissors on the table, and he took them and he stabbed himself in his breast because he was losing the only love of his life.
Well, he's going to lose her if he killed himself, too. He's an idiot.
He was an idiot. He didn't kill himself, but he caused a big ruction and a big disturbance in the family.
Yeah.
So that was, we never heard another word about him all her life.
Good
All
for
right.
her.
Good.
Yeah, you know, and arranged marriages were a common thing because in general, not always, parents have more sense than young people.
Yes.
And so they could well choose somebody that would be a better fit. I know people in the Middle East who had arranged marriages.
That's right. Yes.
Where the parents were really considering what would be the best
For the family.
for both.
For both,
Well,
yes.
actually for the couple.
Yeah, yeah.
And it worked out really well.
Yeah.
But, you know, it doesn't always.
No, well, that was a disaster.
Yeah, I'd say.
A little later, for him, I mean,
For him, but
wasn't
for her,
It was a
a
freedom for her.
disaster avoided.
It was a freedom for her, but I'll come back to it in a moment. She had 3 other incidents in her early life, and if I tell them to you now, it'll save me coming back to them. She had 3 very bad accidents, and they should have been mortal accidents, every one of them.
Right.
But they weren't. And because of that, these accidents made one of the people who knew her very well, she was a governess later to the children of this lady. This lady said, "This girl must have a special place in God's plan because those accidents, she should have been dead 3 times over.
Yeah.
But something saved her." The first accident happened when she was about 4 or 5 years old, before her mother died. And as was the custom with that family and some of the others in that village, they went out for walks out in the country. It was so beautiful in Grand-sur-le-Château, even today. And they'd go out for walks and have a lovely time with nature for half a day or so. So she went with them one day when she was that age, and there was quite a crowd of adults there. And without realizing it, they'd walked into a field that had a herd of cattle in it. And they were well into the field with clear space before they realized how far they had got. And this herd of cattle got disturbed by their presence. And a bull, an enraged bull, rushed at them like that in madness and anger. And all the
Bulls
adults,
are like that all the time.
yeah, well, that's what they were like that day.
Yeah.
And all the adults scattered as far as they could and as quickly as they could. But little Adele was left standing looking at this bull coming. And by the time the adults had got over their fright a little bit and further away from the bull, they looked around and they saw him almost at her, but they couldn't do anything then. And he rushed at her and he picked her up on his horns and kept on running and tossing her and running, tossing her and running. But each time she fell back on his horns, but he kept on until he got to the edge and there was a kind of a barrier before the road. And he was probably tired of having this thing on his head by that time, so he gave an extra big toss. And he tossed her over and she landed on her head on the gravel by the road.
Yeah. That's bad.
Yes, it's very bad.
You know, I have friends who raise cattle, and you got to be very careful when you're going through
You
a
do.
pasture with bulls.
Yes, that's
and
very
depending
right.
on the breed too. Some breeds are meaner than others.
Well, they weren't bees, it was a mad bull.
No, I said some breed
Oh, right.
of cows.
Cow, that's right, yes, they're
cattle
different.
Are meaner.
I understand, that's
Yeah.
quite true. But this one was very cross. So he eventually went back and walked back to where the rest of the herd was.
Yeah.
And the adults got onto the road and they came down and they tried to pick her up because she was unconscious. But when they picked her up, she opened her eyes. She was bleeding down her face, not from the bull, but from where a stone had cut into her forehead when she landed on the road. And they thought that that was going to be terrible for her. But fortunately, she was frightened, but she was not badly injured.
Yeah.
but she bore the mark of that scar all her life, and all her life she had an instinctive dread and fear of a herd of cattle.
Well, that's sensible, actually.
It is sensible. That's right.
That's a good reason to stay in cities like Paris and London. You don't have to worry about herd of cattle out there.
No, but you might have something worse, but never
Yeah.
mind. No, but that's true. And she was, but it also showed that she was a sensible sort of girl. She didn't go into herself and become miserable or anything. She just
Right.
kept on living.
What were the other two? Because we want to make sure that we get to her life in the convent.
Yeah.
What were the other two events that were dangerous?
The two other events, I'll tell you them very quickly. The first one was with the family that she was with. They had to go out with children on a carriage drive one day. And the mother was very busy, and she said to Adele, "Will you take them and bring them back, and they'll have a nice ride down to such and such a village nearby." The man who was doing the harnessing of the carriage and putting the horses into it made a mistake, and he didn't connect the bridle with the reins. But the driver didn't notice until they were going along and they started to go downhill to this town. And so the carriage was heavier than the horses. So their pace got quicker and quicker and quicker, and the driver realized he had no control. So the horses could have either gone mad or fallen over and broken their necks, and anything could have happened. And one of the little children was in the front beside the driver. And so Adele put her hands over and she held on to that little boy so that he wouldn't be thrown out if it stopped suddenly, because she had a barrier between him and her, so he should save his life.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were just about to have a calamity. Fortunately, another cart or farm cart came along and saw what was happening, and he came at an angle to them and he moved the horses to get slower and slower. So they ended with a bang on the wall of the central square, but they weren't hurt.
That's good.
But they should have all been killed, really,
Yeah.
or hurt, injured badly.
Yeah.
The third one was when she was a bit older than that, in her 20s, middle 20s, the family that she was with went out for a train ride to another city where her other families were. Well, when they got into the train, it was very primitive trains in those days, Adele was asked to go back onto the station because somebody had left something behind. So she walked across the lines. There was no special place to go back. And she walked across the line. She got what she had to get. But when she came back to start going across the lines to get the train at the other side, another train was coming into the station. And at that moment, she tripped and got her heel of her knee-length boots caught, and she couldn't get out of them. And that train was coming. It was too late for it to stop.
Yeah, they can't stop.
They can't stop. Anyway, what happened was one of the attendants on the railway station, he was very quick-witted and nimble. He got out and he yanked her foot out, but he couldn't pick her up, and because the train was nearly there, and so he stepped back and said, "Lie down, lie flat on your face." And she did just that. And the whole train went over her very slowly. But those trains in those days, they had iron bars that went down underneath for the engine and the wheels. And nobody knew whether she would come out dead or alive at the end of it.
Right. So but she didn't die, obviously, and she survived all that.
Yeah.
You know, so that sense of a mission that God had, He's not letting her die these easy ways.
That's right.
That there's going to be something else for her life.
That's right. Now, at that time, the lady who was the mother of those children said exactly that, because this was a very special girl in her mind and in her sister's mind, who also was a governess to the children of Adele. Well, I'll just go a little bit with the Eucharistic bit from here on then, because that's part of it. At that time, a little earlier than that, Adele had, after this marriage event, you know, a tragedy, she says that she got very worldly. Other people said she didn't, but she thought she did. But one day, when she was about 19, I think it was, she went to a sermon or preached by a passing Jesuit missionary one evening in the church, and he preached so amazingly on the Trinity and on the Eucharist that she couldn't get over it. She'd never heard anything like it in her life, and it so moved her that she asked afterwards, could she go to confession to him? Because she wanted to confess all her sins that she thought she was so bad about. Well, when he heard her confession, he said to her after, he said, look, I won't say any more to you today, but I would like you to come back and see me in about 2 or 3 days' time. So she did. And this is what he said to her. But before I say it, I'm going to go back to the Jansenist heresies. People didn't go to Mass every day or communion every day. Most Catholics went once or twice a year. And that was all they were ever allowed to go or thought should go. So she went back to him and he talked to her seriously and he said, look, you are now living just quite close to the church. You should be going to Holy Mass every day. And also, I'm telling you, you must receive Holy Communion every day.
That was fairly common among Jesuits.
That's right.
To encourage frequent communion.
That's right.
Monthly communion was considered very frequent.
Yes.
When the society was started, but then later on,
it got bad with the heresy.
They wanted to encourage even more frequent communion.
Yeah.
And we were among the strongest opponents of the Jansenist heresy.
That was a blessing for her.
Yeah.
Yes, blessing for many.
Yeah.
So she did exactly that. She obeyed him, but he was a passing person. She never saw him again.
Yeah.
But then she found from that time on, she was changing spiritually and becoming more serious about her faith, and a great thirst and hunger for the Holy Eucharist and the Mass especially. And she kept that practice up. Then in her middle 20s, she went over to the west of France, where her elder sister had gone, to be a governess to a family. And this family was a very important family in that part of the world. Madame de Crochat was the name of the mother, and she was governess with her for a long time, several years. Then later she became governess to the sister of that they had other family.
But again, we're running low on time. So, where did that lead her in terms of religious conversion?
That led to her religious conversion. So much so that there were 2 things to tell you, but I'm telling you the Eucharistic ones mainly first. The family that she was living in the second time did not have access to daily Mass or daily communion. So she spoke to the parents, couldn't we have a chapel in our house? And the bishop gave permission. And she was the one that was appointed to take care of the little chapel. And then her Eucharistic devotion went on so strongly that she'd make holy hours almost every day, and holy hours at night as well. And it was at that time that she really felt called to become a religious. And it didn't happen because she was too frail in her health.
Yeah, a lot of convents had to be very cautious about letting sisters in who couldn't stand the life.
No, that's right.
The life is difficult.
So she couldn't. So you have to wait 60 years till she became a nun. But at the same time, the other big element that entered into her life, which is what she's famous for, and is a service to the church, is in fact a Marian preparation for becoming a religious in the church. Because this place was near Pont-Main in Laval in western France. Have you ever heard of the Pont-Main story?
Not
a detail, but I won't tell you in detail.
Right.
But it was an amazing thing, and lots of things happened there. On the 17th of January, 1871, the Franco-Prussian War was coming, and they were going to blow up the bridge of Mayenne that night. And they didn't. What happened was Our Lady appeared, and the visions of Pont-Main are quite exceptional to all other visions because there are 4 or 5 different images of Our Lady in different ways that came, but saying that God was going to hear her prayers, their prayers, to keep on praying to him. And the sky was filled with stars. The Virgin was in a star-spangled dress. Anyway, afterwards, they didn't blow up the bridge, they retreated. And later on, the general in charge of them said that he couldn't do anything because every time they approached that bridge, a strong lady stood in front and would not let them pass.
So and she's over in that place. Now, sister, we have to take a break.
Yeah.
So we're going to come back in a couple of minutes.
Yes.
And pick up the story.
Yes.
So please stay with us.
All right, fine.
Welcome back. We are in the conversation with Mother Xavier Mcmonagle and Mother Marie-Adele, talking about Sister Adele, Mother Adele Garnier, and who's in the process of being, towards canonization.
Yes.
Let's get to her vocation.
Yeah.
What's key there in the story?
In that story there.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, when the bishop had the investigation into this apparition at Pont-Main, he found that they needed an artist to draw the images. And the only artist they could find capable of doing it was Mother Marie-Adele Garnier.
So she
is
was the one who's commissioned to make the image.
Yes, and all the future ones that were made all go back to what she had done
Okay.
in the archives there.
Okay.
Right, so that's Pont-Main, but she had a great devotion to Our Lady the rest of her life for that reason.
Okay.
Right, but at the same time, at Pont-Main and in the Laval area, the beginnings of the history of the modern Basilica of the Sacred Heart at Montmartre, the vow had been made just 2 weeks before.
So, so a lot of folks don't know Paris, but on a mountain called Montmartre, it's a large hill in Paris, where the first martyrs of Paris, Saint Denis,
that's right.
or Dionysius, as he was called in his days, he was the bishop missionary to Paris. He and his companions were martyred. That's why it's called Montmartre. And this is where they were going to build a basilica to the Sacred Heart.
They were going to build a basilica to the Sacred Heart, and most histories begin back at St. Margaret Mary's time,
right?
Couple of centuries earlier.
Yes.
Because that's what Jesus asked her to do, to have a shrine or a monument built to reparation for the sins of France.
Right.
And that's the national vow, as it became called later.
Yes.
Yes. Now, it was only a monument that was asked to be built. Well, that was published in the French newspapers in 1872 and 3. And where she was governess to, the parents were reading out that notice from the newspapers one evening. And she was going outside to walk in the evening light. And when she got to the door and hearing about Montmartre, she had an amazing vision of the Basilica of Montmartre, and she saw herself in the middle of it as a nun, praying and adoring the Blessed Sacrament. She had another vision later, a little time, and the Lord said to her, "You are to go to the Bishop of Paris and give him my message that in that place at Montmartre, the devotion is to be to the Eucharistic heart of my Eucharistic heart, and it's to be day and night adoration." Now, the men and the government and the bishops had not thought of anything of that sort at all.
Right.
And anyway, she had a hard time. She didn't want to tell anybody she had that. She was quite, distraught about it. Who was she to go to the cardinal?
Right.
But anyway, Father Chamberlain, who was the Jesuit provincial of France at the time, was her director. And he had encouraged her Eucharistic and Sacred Heart devotion. He said to her, no, you have to go and do what the Lord has asked you to do, because he believed it was true. So after quite a long time, 18 months, 1874, she actually went to see Cardinal Guibert in December, and he received her graciously, but when she gave this message, he said to her, it's impossible, we can't do that. And why do we have to have another devotion to the Sacred Heart, his Eucharistic heart? We've already have enough. But she explained what she thought the Lord had told her again and left it. And 2 years later, the reason why he wouldn't have adoration day and night in the temporary chapel, which was there, was because the whole area was a place of prostitution.
Right. There was Montmartre.
It still is.
Yeah, still is.
A
place of a certain amount of licentiousness.
Exactly. Yes.
I've only heard that.
No, but it's true. It is true.
Yeah.
But anyway, he didn't. He said no. So she went back and she told her confessor, and he said to her, well, you have done what the Lord asked you, so be at peace. He will arrange it. A couple of years later, he had started perpetual adoration in that temporary chapel. And not only that, he started an association to the Eucharistic heart of people who would do the adoration. So that was number one. Number two, then she felt and believed she should go there as herself and live as a hermit and pray for the church in France and the world, the Pope and priests especially, because of the way the persecution that was on.
Sure. See, that, again, so folks understand, the French government had been going back and forth since before the French Revolution in 1789 between its Catholic roots as a culture and the rejection of its faith and Catholicism. And governments in the late 1800s became anti-Catholic again.
Yes. But that anti-Catholic government actually gave the church the land at the top of Montmartre for the Archbishop of Paris to do this work there, and that was a miracle in itself.
Sure.
Anyway, she went there to live for a short time, but her health broke down totally, and she had to depart. And at that time, she felt strongly the influence of satanic interventions in her life that she had to overcome. She had to wait another 20 years before the time came in God's time for her to go to Montmartre and found that order there.
And she founded a small convent. It was in a house.
That's right.
Originally.
The side of Montmartre.
And they stayed there and started the adoration. But, again, I want to make sure we get to Tyburn as well.
Yes, we will.
Why did they have to leave Montmartre? Because eventually they were driven out.
Yes, well, I think first of all, there's another thing that's very important, which is that she did not know that the new Archbishop of Paris had forbidden any religious order to be founded there. She did not know that. But the priest who was in charge of the basilica did know it, and he was the one who was trying to lead her on and see what God wanted from her. When he was convinced, he went to the Archbishop, who didn't listen to him because he was doing something else, until in the end he said, look, you have to listen to me because I'm telling you something important. So the bishop listened, Cardinal Richard, and he accepted it. He said, that is from God and you must encourage them. Then, in the next couple of years, they were started at Montmartre. They went daily there for their adorations and their prayer and their Holy Mass, and a lot of people followed them, and there were about 11 in the community there by 1901. That time, the French laws of association were coming into force with a new vigour, and many religious orders had to leave France because all their property would be confiscated because the government didn't approve of them.
That happened to my own order too. The Jesuits and many others.
That's right.
Well, and England
and we wouldn't
welcomed
have
us.
We wouldn't have St. Binos today in Wales.
That's right.
You wouldn't have them for that.
Right.
Or Gerald Manley Hopkins either.
Right, a lot of Jesuits went to England
That's
for
right.
refuge because of this. And it's interesting that that's when the French government came up in their constitution with the separation of church and state,
Exactly, exactly.
which some Americans want. It's not in our constitution in the United States, and it never has been. But you know, this is something that they want, and that's why they talk about that. So
Right.
she went to England.
Yes, the cardinal gave her the advice, and the best lawyers gave her the advice that they must leave Montmartre and go where the cardinal wanted them to go. So they went to London. He knew Cardinal Vaughan. Okay, how much more time?
Not much. So
No, okay. So shortly thereafter, they had to get permission to live there and have Mass in the Blessed Sacrament. She was unknown, a French woman, a poor community, refugees, you might say. But when they arrived at England, they knelt down on the soil of getting off the boat and kissed the ground, and they said, "We're not on exile, we're on the mission." And they wanted to save England back to the faith. And
that's an important element too. That you know, a lot of times throughout the lives of many saints, Saint Paul talks about this. God shuts doors,
yes, that's right.
but then
Opens
opens up
another.
other ones.
Exactly. Well, what happened there, I'll take 3 minutes to tell it. A letter was written in their name to the Archbishop saying, could these nuns, would you give them permission to have Mass, communion and adoration and a convent? And another man who had been wanting to look after the martyrs and get a public place of worship for them also went and visited Tyburn, which was just along from where they were, one day, and prayed as usual for this to happen, a place of public worship, because now Catholics could worship in England. But
Right.
through the three penal centuries, they couldn't publicly.
Yeah, the Catholic Church was illegal in England.
No.
Finally, in the early 1800s, they were
Right.
given their freedom
That's
to
right.
worship again.
And this was a few decades down the line from
Yes.
that. And this poor French woman and poor French community came over. The cardinal was presented with these 2 letters at the same time by his secretary from the man who saw a place for sale at Tyburn, and the nun's letter asking for permission to hold the Blessed Sacrament, to have Mass. So he looked at the letters and he said, why not let these French nuns from Montmartre come to the place of the martyrs in England and put their convent there, and they could have a shrine there for the martyrs.
See, that's one of the things that fascinated about the story of Mother Adele Garnier, that they went from the place of one set of martyrs
Yes.
from the capital of
Yes.
France
To the
to the
capital
place
of
of another
Yes,
set of
yes.
martyrs in the capital of Great Britain.
Yes, but actually it was much more than that, as she found out as time went on. When she learnt about these martyrs, they were dying for the same thing as she was living. That is to say, the Holy Mass, Holy Communion, adoration of the Blessed, honour of the Blessed Sacrament, prayer for the Pope and finish of church persecution, conversion of the country where you are, and praying for priests and bishops who uphold the church. And all those things are part of our charism. And all the martyrs were died and lived and died for that. But the other thing that Paul VI brought out when he canonized 40 of them some decades ago was the English martyrs as a group have one quality that no other group of martyrs have ever manifested. They were filled with joy and exhilaration when they were being hanged from the tree.
Yeah.
And their last words were always, we pray, we forgive the Queen, we forgive the King, we pardon them, and one day we'll all meet joyously in heaven. And why should anybody be offended because I'm going to heaven cheerfully?
Yeah.
And they all went like that.
You see that quite a bit with, the dying words of, not at Tyburn, but over at the Tower of London from St. Thomas More, where
Like
his
that.
executioner.
Yes.
Pray for me as I will for thee,
you.
that we may meet merrily in heaven.
That's right.
And that sense of meeting merrily in heaven together with his executioner.
There was it, yes. But there was another thing that she took to heart gratefully and deeply was the words of St. John Fisher. He wasn't a Tyburn martyr. He should have been, but he wouldn't.
Right.
Wasn't. He said to the King and to England, you are trying to take the Holy Eucharist and the Mass out of our religion. And in doing so, it is as if you are taking the sun out of the universe.
Yes.
And that is exactly what our mother always said. The Mass is the sun of my life.
Yeah. And it's a matter of fact, even when we have
Yes.
a monstrance,
Yeah.
most of the time, the traditional monstrances always have
the rays of the
rays
sun.
like a sun
That's right.
because of the prophecy in Malachi.
Exactly. I was coming to that.
That
That's
it
my
was
point.
that the Messiah
Yeah.
would have
From-
the healing rays like the sun's
right.
rays.
That's right.
But the healing is the one of righteousness who
That's
brings
right.
his healing rays
Yes.
in Malachi 3. So this is something that is, part of our imagery for
Why we have the monstrance like
the monstrance the way we have, and
That's right.
our adoration of the Blessed Sacrament
Yes.
is to let the rays of his love heal our sinful souls.
That's right. And her other devotion into the Eucharist, final one, was this of offering herself with Jesus in the host wherever Mass was being offered throughout the day or night.
That's right.
And that goes with that, from the rising of the sun to its setting.
Yes. Well, it's
yeah.
one of the things that we make in the morning offering
Exactly.
is to offer our daily lives
That's right.
in union
Union
with
with-
the Mass being
right.
offered around the world.
That's right. And she has a beautiful prayer with that in it. Beautiful prayer.
Now, when did she die? Because she was able to move the convent there.
Yes.
Despite and there've been a lot of dangers during
Yeah.
wartime. I mean,
Yes.
London was
Yeah.
attacked at times. But when
yes.
did she pass away?
She passed away in 1924 on the 17th of June.
Okay.
And that was between the two world wars.
Yes.
Yes. She had tried in her lifetime to build a bigger convent chapel at Tyburn. She never could, never get permission for it. We were bombed at the end of 1944, the war in June 1944.
That's when the Nazis had
Those
been
flying
sending
bombs.
the buzz
Flying
bombs.
That's right.
They were the earliest form of rockets.
That's right.
And they were indiscriminate. They couldn't be directed.
No.
They just could fly over to
in a flight.
London and then fall wherever they might.
Well, this one came across the park. Hyde Park is opposite us. It came flying across the park and it exploded in a plane tree, one of these big plane trees, and just across the road from where we are. So it buffered the main impact of its explosion.
Yes.
But the convent was destroyed.
Yes.
But we have now gained from that 3 other buildings we were given in compensation, and we've gone on from there.
Yes.
But this is how a French woman and her French congregation came over to England and provided the English people and the English church with the encouragement of public worship for their Reformation martyrs who
Yes.
died for the Holy Mass, the unity of the church, the Pope, and all the conversion of the country.
And I urge people to read some of the writings by those martyrs. St. Edmund Campion's Brag
That's right.
is
10
not
men.
very long. You can
No,
get
10
that easily
reasons.
online.
Yes.
The poetry of St. Robert
Southall,
Southall,
the beautiful
you know,
poet.
just wonderful, wonderful poetry, and how these and many others, including a Garnier.
Yes,
There was a
exactly.
brother who was a Garnier that was very clever in making priest holes to hide priests
Yes.
in different places. These stories are great, but this is where you can also, if you go to London, this is a place where you can go to pray. Now, Mother Maria, I'd like to get to you because y'all are
Mother's
getting
house.
the canonization process going.
That's right.
And you've even, your community has recently purchased the original home of Mother Garnier.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about that in our last few minutes.
No, we founded a monastery in 2013 because the house of Mother Foundress, where she was born in Grancy-le-Château, was there. And our monastery is about 32 kilometers from there.
Okay.
And for 3 years, we had been traveling to Grancy-le-Château to pray outside her house.
Yeah.
And it was a tourist center. And but it was always closed. It's only open in July and August normally.
Yeah.
And so it looked quite odd, you know, all of us praying outside in rain, hail, shine and snow.
Yes.
But amazingly, I still can't believe it, on the 3rd of December last year, when when we had the opening ceremony for the cause of canonization of our foundress, or beatification for our foundress, a few of the locals came up to me while I was pouring tea for them after the Mass, and they said to me, "Oh, Ma Mère, did you know that the house of Mother Foundress was for sale?" And of course, my eyes lit open, and I was saying, "Who, when, what?" And you know, we moved as quickly as we could, even though we had very little, to try and purchase the property. And I was asked, you know, whether we had the funds to do it, and well, I couldn't think of any funds except for God's providence, you know.
Yeah.
So I said, "Yes, we do." And within a week and a half, we managed to raise all the funds that we needed to buy the house.
So now you've purchased that house, and what are you doing with it?
Well, after we leave here, the United States, we're going back and we're going to start making moves to build a chapel within that house and a museum on the life of Mother Foundress. And next year in May, we hope to run a pilgrimage from Tyburn, and which will travel all around to some of the places Mother's mentioned. And it will end up with hopefully a high Mass in hopefully the new chapel that we built.
Now, is Tyburn the only convent that your community has?
No, we have 11 monasteries all around the world. Yes.
And so a lot of Americans won't pick it up, but you're not from England, are you?
No, I'm not.
No, you're from?
I'm Australian. I was born in Australia. I'm what they call an ABC, Australian-born Chinese.
There you go. And sister, you also, Mother, you're not from England either.
I'm from New Zealand.
New Zealand, yeah, which is not that far away. So from Australia, that is
that's right.
far from here. You know, and so your communities have spread
very wide,
all around the world, and I guess you have communities in Australia.
We have a community in Australia, Sydney, at Riverstone, and 2 communities in New Zealand. One in South Auckland at a place called Bombay, but that's not India. And the other one is at Rotorua. Ngakuru is the name.
Is that also in the North Island?
Yes,
Yes, they're both in the North Island.
So you have, you know, in Australia and New Zealand, you have convents, as well as other parts of the world.
Yes.
And I can't emphasize enough how important in world history the Benedictine communities are.
That's right.
You know, that what civilized the barbarians were Benedictines of faith.
That's right. That's true.
And that the churches and monasteries they built became the centers of cities like Monachium, which means monastery. Now it's called by its more Germanized name, München or Munich. But that was from a Benedictine monastery. Salzburg and many other places were, and many French cities were founded by Benedictines who were key in civilizing the barbarians.
So are you talking about re-evangelization or re-civilization?
Yes. Because it was the evangelization that led to civilization. And it's the gospel that transformed, as I oftentimes point out. Left to themselves, people would have known about, what they would have known about the Goths were berserkers.
Yes, that's right.
Berserkers were Gothic elite warriors. They were called that, and we use the word because they would go berserk and they'd kill you. But what we now remember is not berserkers, but Gothic cathedrals.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And this is something where, again, the evangelization leads to civilization.
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
That's right.
And you know this.
We need it today.
We very much do. There's a new barbarity
That's right.
that's on the rise,
Yes.
and prayer and adoration and evangelization are going to be key. I want to let people know that they can learn more about you by going to tyburnconvent.org.uk, and Tyburn is spelled Tyburn. tyburnconvent.org.uk. And also, there's a book you can get called The Path of Mother Adele Garnier. You can get that from EWTN's religious catalog. Just go to EWTNRC.com, or you can call 1-800-854-6316. Ask for item number 474. Thank you both for the long journey you made and for being with us. And may Almighty God bless all of you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And, you know, we can bring you these programs and all of our other shows because Mother Angelica also received her inspiration that this network would be brought to you by you. That's how she believed our Lord wanted it. So instead of commercials and stuff, we ask you to keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill, and we'll be able to pay our bills too. Thank you, and God bless.